Alrighty, so I'm going to do something a little different this week. I'm going to work ahead enough to where if you happen to hear this video before Wednesday night's class on May 1st, it might be a good idea if you head in if you have any questions about Dev 5. Okay? So, and just to remind ourselves of the schedule. So next week I am traveling. I'll be at Google I/O this week, and also other events that I do because of the community work that I'm do for Google. And I say work in air quotes. And in this case, I do have a Learn Together, which basically is you reporting the progress you're making on your Dev 5. But I'll go over this now. And as a way of going over it, I'm going to show you what I did, because I took what I showed last week for how I used one model, one doc in one collection for my development of my particular topic. And this week I took this to the next step and I did an embedded doc so that I could have it by, for me, I call it member, Andrew called it user. Okay, so I'm going to show you what I did as another example, because some of you will choose what I showed last week. Some of you may choose my embedded example as far as the way you're going to handle your data, the most important part of this. And then some of you will have moved, as I said last week, on to the next section and done login authorization. Okay, so just FYI. Okay, so then here's the simple write-up for the Learn Together 17, which is just to watch this video, work on your Dev 5, and then report your progress in your reply. And here's the key, and this is what I've added to the written information for Dev 5, is, I want to be clear. I want you to add some functionality above what we saw with Andrew's task manager development, right? And you can choose, as I said last week, to either do that development at the point that you're recording or that you're saving the data into Mongo, or you can do it after. And then some kind of reporting, an endpoint that does some type of reporting. And if you're not sure what that means, come chat with me so we can be clear and make sure you do the best that you can on this last development. Because remember, because we kind of skipped, we did skip development 4. This will, whatever you get in this development 5 will also be posted into development 4. Okay, so let me move into my app. And as I've said, and I know there's a lot on the screen, so it's hard to see. So I think what I'll do is first just start with my model. So for my model, I have a member name, and I did use the unique because it has to be unique names. And I could have used ID here, but I used member name because I was thinking about just how the user would use this. So anyway, I could switch this for sure. And then I used email, and I used the regular expression. We talked about that in class last week to test to make sure that the email is a valid email. I also used unique on the email. And so the rest of this is now, so at the member level, I'm capturing the opening transaction. So this is just, and I'm defaulting date so that I'm capturing the date the transaction was done, and it's just the amount. Okay, so this is a single object. So this is different in the sense of inside of this opening TX, this opening transaction, I have an object in here. Now, I guess that's not different. Really what's different is the last two, which is my sending transactions and my receiving transactions. So this is the idea of sending RioCoin between my members, right? And so each member would have, of course, an opening balance, and I'll show you how to process that and what that looks like. And then you would have a sender transaction. This is where this person's sending money to somebody. And then I would have receiving transactions where somebody is sending money to, this member is receiving that. So the key is here is that this is an array. Okay, so what happens is each time somebody sends, each time this member sends, this will be a new array for this sender transactions. Okay, and then the same is true for receiving. And so again, I've captured the date. I have added this feedback feature because one of the things, again, thinking back to CRUD, right? Create, read, update, and delete, is that I wouldn't want to delete any transaction because of the open ledger idea that once you accept a transaction in the system, you wouldn't delete it. So I've come up with a feedback and I've defaulted to a string. So then somebody could go back and add default, like this is a sender. So this is me sending to somebody, or this member sending. So in this case, I could update feedback for either my sender or my sending or receiving transactions. Okay. So I only have one model, but it is an embedded document to where I have a member. This is a member that has in it allows for arrays so that I can capture transactions. Okay. Okay. All right. So let me scroll down because I have everything running, so you don't have to watch me do that part. And I was just testing out that uniqueness to make sure that works. So let me move over to my index file. So I have a little more work to do here, but for the most part, I feel like I'm probably like 85% there. I did end up changing my endpoint names because I did some thinking about this, right? So I'm going to scroll up to the top. So then RioCoin is just the idea of opening a transaction. And there's really nothing new here. Except that, right? So not except, I'm just trying to see if I'm setting up a new member, right? I'm trying to find one to see if that member already exists. If so, I store it and then I just do some testing. If I don't have one, and then of course I record it into the database. This is a pretty simple endpoint. And this is just to view all the members, right? And this is to pull them, went a little too far. So this is to pull them by ID, right? But this is really, and this is the one I wanted to show you, how I handled the idea. In fact, let me pull right up a little bit just so you can see this. So this was me updating a particular member, and I actually said here, right? So this is really for academic purposes, and I'm only going to allow for email because, and I say this as documentation because I'm going to create some of these endpoints that I'm actually wouldn't really use in this real development, just because they wouldn't make sense for my particular app, but because I know the requirements is to create a CRUD application, I am going to implement that in my code. Okay. So I really want to take you down to here where I'm actually processing the transaction because that's the most involved one for me. We're processing a new transaction. So let me drop this down so you can see that. And the one thing I actually absolutely need to do, and I'll be doing this today, is actually moving these out into their own file, a route file, so that my index file will be definitely cleaned up. So that's another piece I know I need to add. So in this case, here's a transaction between members, right? So I have a sender and a receiver, and again, I'll show you Postman in a minute. These are async functions, and so I can use the await. So I capture the sender and receiver. I have a try-catch block. We see this as, and once you finish into all the code up, you'll see this is the last iteration. We have now done callbacks, promises, and now we're doing async await, which I think is, once you learn async await, is like, oh yes, it makes so much more sense. So what I'm doing here, and this is one of the things I really liked about the way this worked out, is that I'm capturing the sender doc, right? By doing a find one on the sender. And then I'm doing an await here. And I'm also setting a default value because because of the way I'm going to check to see if the member existed. Now there was multiple ways I could have done this, but I basically await, find the member, If you don't find it, right, if this comes back as false, then just set this as 0 so I can do some checking to see if that sender, because the sender and receiver has to be a valid member before I can process the transaction. Okay, so then what I do is I actually have abstracted just a function called getBalance where I pass it the doc, and that's down at the bottom here. So this would be considered, right, my additional functionality that I've added. And so I call this, I pass in a doc, I set up the 0, I set up sender and receiver balances. Now this is when I'm looking at one particular member. And then I just iterate through the sending and receiving transactions. And then I just return whatever that opening balance is from the sender and receiver, and then I return that. So that's how I get the balances. Pretty straightforward concept there, but I wanted to abstract it because I need it multiple times. And I'm actually going to end up needing it for one other route I'm going to do. So then if the receiver balance in this case takes into account, in this case, because what I'm doing is once I get the balance back, I'm subtracting out whatever the amount of the transaction. And then what I do is if it's greater than 0, so if the sender has enough of a balance, then I'm going to set up, and actually I realize I'm actually going to change this a little bit because I'm actually not using the result here, but that's okay, I can do that. But I want to show you and this is really something we saw Andrew do as well, was I'm using a find one and update. So I find that user. And in this case, the update is the part that's a little different. I'm actually doing an add to set. So that's a method that actually pushes onto my sender transaction, right? This amount, the receiving, the member who's receiving, right? So the receiving members. So this is me posting, like who was it that sent money? So the amount and that receiving. And in that case, the only other, and I actually need to end up adding these here, I realize I set true. So I get the new document back, and then I run those validators, right? So the difference here is really just this add to set, which pushes, which is basically a push of an array into that, right? So if we were looking at this, I was looking at this right here, okay? So, and then I do the same thing for the receiver. So what I do is when there's a transaction, I actually have to post into both the sender and receiver docs. Okay. So this is just doing the other side of the transaction. So then I set up an object, giving some information, and that's what I send back to the API in form of an object. Okay. Okay, so let me just show you how this works now, just quickly. So this is the list of members, no big deal. This is actually processing. So I actually show you, if I tried, I'd already set up this member, but I get an error message, it's already set up. So let me actually just do one for demo purposes so you can see this. So I can have 3 members in here, right? So I would do demo. And then this has to be unique. So I can do demo, and then I can add like, let's say 500. Okay. So then I'm going to send this off. So now if I do list members, I should have 3 members in my system. Cool. Okay. And you can see I've already processed some transactions here, and that's that default string that I have in there. So I have Joe, I have Jane, and I have demo. So then, of course, the most involved one is the idea of doing transactions, right? So if I do demo here, this is Joe sending an amount of $50 Rio coin, right? So here's that object that I sent back, right? So the balance, the receiver, and the transaction was successful. And if I bumped up this amount to like, some amount that I know is not there, and then the transaction that the sender balance was the issue, right? So in this case, Joe does not have enough in his balance to process transaction. Okay, so here again, using Postman to save your your endpoints and the data that you're passing is really helpful. This will definitely be way important when you come in to do your last code review for Dev 5. So make sure you do that. Okay, so the only other thing I wanted to show you, so that's just a brief input of that. Again, if you want to come into class on our Wednesday night, I'm going to go over that in more detail. That's my plan for tonight, May 1st. But this is showing you what you need to do. And then I just added one thing in here, which is really important, and this is what I've been talking about, is you need to add functionality above what Andrew demonstrated in Task Manager. And you can either do that functionality above the validation and sanitization in the model, or you can create an endpoint. And here's what I mean by that. So for me, I actually added above, so my verification, not validation, my verification is my additional code, but I am also going to add one of these endpoints for balance. That's one of the things I need to do today, to where I would have an endpoint just for running and looking at, have an endpoint that actually sends back the balance for a particular member. So that's an example of something that is added functionality, right? And that's why it's really important. I had you in this last week, actually in tonight's, but again, depending on when you watch this, is go through and document your API endpoints. And in that, I will be looking for what's the additional functionality that you're doing. Okay. All right, so I've talked about the date. I've shown you at least what I have, what I've created, which I said is about 85% done. I will have had the rest of it. And then what we will have is once I get back, a night where we can just work with you with your code. So if you don't make it tonight, I definitely recommend, if you're needing some clarification, that you come in on the 15th. Otherwise, the 22nd is the last night. And as I promised, I will today actually go in and set up that schedule so that you can put yourself on the schedule for Dev 5. But if you want to do it on this week, that's fine as well. If you have it done, I definitely recommend that, because the sooner you get it done, the sooner you could adjust based on any feedback I might give you. All right, hope that helps, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.